We're ready. Let's do this. Are we live? Woohoo! Hello, world. All right, good morning. I will call this meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for being here. A little bit of housekeeping before we approve the minutes. After our last meeting, one of the questions that came up, and I also chair the transient guest tax meeting, it occurred to me, we don't have any rules for this committee, and committees should probably have a few rules. Maybe that's the old lobbyist who has to deal with all those legislators in me. So, and I will email this out, Hannah, to you, and I'll get some copies for us. So I made two sets of rules, just generic, very generic rules for the committee, and some rules for anyone who's presenting or speaking to the committee that just outlines, hey, here's the time to speak. They're very basic. I'll send them out. They don't need approval because I'm the chair and I get to set the rules to some degree. I looked in our city municipal code, but it's not my discretion in this case. But so I'll get to send out, and I may send them out to staff so we can get them posted on the website under our committee rule page. But so just something simple to get done. The second thing is this agenda originally had, and then it was changed a couple days ago. We talked previously about a ordinance as it relates to contracts over $50,000 or some amount. We are still working on that. We're just not there with the language yet, and instead of us having another hypothetical discussion, it seems like it'll be a much more productive conversation when we get together in 5 weeks or so again and actually have something to look at and read and discuss to move forward versus just, continuing to hypothetically talk about it. So I'm trying to keep those conversations on point. With that, our next order of business is approving the meeting rules or the meeting minutes from last month.
I move approval.
Do I have a second?
I second.
All right. I saw nothing wrong with them. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Aye. That would be nobody because we all agree. All right. With that, our first item is, it's listed under here as residency requirements, which is not inaccurate. I'll tell you how this came about, and this is going to be a long process. There is no proposal in front of us. Over the last year, several discussions have come up, both at governing body meetings and in some of our other committee meetings, of varying degrees. Some of them are that right now our residency requirements for staff are sort of these things that were established that are at the discretion of the city manager. It's not really laid out in municipal code, and that there's people who'd like to see a much more clear definition of what residency is. There's others, as they've talked both in some of the policing issues and others, about maybe we need to take a look again at residency requirements if we want to recruit some talent. I know that gets a little controversial for some, whether they have to live in the city or don't have to live in the city. But so the point of this discussion is not to say this is what we're doing and let's see how we can get there. It's to allow staff to come in starting today, and then again, I think in our next couple meetings, to just talk to us about the challenges they face. There will be an opportunity at a meeting that's at a more convenient time for the public to come in and give us their thoughts. And I can tell everyone right now, and you can read whatever you want into this. If we do come up with something, it will not be put forward to the governing body till mid-November or December. Okay, so and that's the earliest it would come up if we think there's something that comes out of these discussions. So it does say residency requirements, but I want to be clear, there's no proposal on the table at this time. This is informational and fact-finding, and then sort of listen to all the other things people have talked to me about possible changes, and we'll sort of go from there. I have no preconceived notions of where this is going to go. With that, I believe Jacque is here. She can tell us what she wants to tell us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What I prepared is just some information on how residency comes up in our recruitment and retention. So when we have an online application for our positions, and we survey abandoned applications. Abandoned applications are those applications that are started but not completed. And so when we see that in our system, we send out a survey to find out why that was abandoned. And 36.36% of the responses to our survey for not having completed mentioned residency and not being interested in relocating to Shawnee County. Some of the comments that were also part of that survey included, I would very much like to be employed by the city of Topeka, but midway through the application, I read I must become a resident of Shawnee County within 6 months. I'm not interested in moving. Another comment, I live in Manhattan, and after looking more closely at the job announcement, I saw you need to be a resident of Shawnee County. I'm very interested in the job, however, I do not reside in the Shawnee County area, though I live less than 17 minutes away, which is less time than driving from some areas within the Shawnee County boundaries. So those are comments from those abandoned application surveys. When we looked at our completed applications from 2017 to present, there were 82 completed applications where the applicant indicated they were not willing to relocate to Shawnee County. So when we have an application that marks not willing to relocate to Shawnee County, we do not refer that application to the hiring manager for consideration for their position because they're not willing to come into that residency requirement. Some of our recent recruitments that have been impacted by residency, either at the not completing the application, completing but not willing to relocate, declining an interview, or declining an offer of employment, include the positions of mayor's assistant, public works accounting specialist 2, public safety systems analyst, and that's a police analyst position at the police department, and data management analyst with public works technical support group. So those are some of the more recent ones where that has been indicated. Another thing that we do on the retention side is we try to capture feedback when employees are leaving the city through exit interviews. And that's either through an online survey or an in-person interview. And during the pandemic, we've had to rely much more so on our online survey. Not all people leaving the city complete an exit interview, but of those who did complete an exit interview since 2018, residency was brought up as a factor for leaving 12.17% of the time. So those are the trackable statistics that we have on the recruitment and the retention side, where employees or candidates have mentioned residency as a factor.
I know that the current policy is you have 6 months to move here, and the city manager can grant an additional 6 months. Is that correct?
Well, most of our positions have a 6-month probationary period, so they actually have 6 months after completing that initial probationary period, and then after, so essentially a year.
Okay.
And then after that year, the city manager can grant one extension of up to 6 months.
Okay, so it could be up to 18 months.
Yes.
Okay. All right, that makes a little more sense. Yep. Questions? Councilmember?
Thank you, Chair. Jacque, you said I think 82 people indicated they wouldn't relocate to get a job, to take a job with the city. Out of how many?
I did not bring that number. Lately, we've had, I mean, it's probably thousands. I can get that number. The system was really being shaky when they were trying to pull this information out because there's so much in there.
Okay.
But I can certainly get that number for you. The number of applications since 2017 would be thousands.
And that was 82 out of that?
Yes.
Out of it, okay.
For all of our open positions.
So is it fair to say it's a pretty small number then?
It is a small number,
Okay.
but some of these positions are kind of specialized positions where we don't have large candidate pools compared to some of the more clerical positions that we recruit higher volumes of.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Councilwoman Hager?
Thank you. So it would be safe to say too that these are, the 82 people are people who started the application process and did not see the requirement for residents until after they started that application process. So we aren't capturing how many people were considering the job saw the residency, and then never started the application. So I think that's something to take into consideration, even though it is a smaller number. Do we know about communities around our area, like Manhattan or Lawrence, or even to Kansas City, Wichita, Emporia? Do they also have these residency requirements?
I did not bring that specific information with me this morning. I do know that Lawrence essentially does not have a residency requirement. I think they recently made a change prior to the last few months. I believe their department directors had to reside in Douglas County. But let me get that and clarify. But residency to the county is becoming more and more rare, but we do have some information on that. And if I could clarify, there was 36% of people that started an application did not finish it because of residency being a reason that responded to our survey. But of those that completed the entire application, as part of completing the application, they listed, there's a box that they check, yes, I'm willing to relocate, or no. Of those completed applications, 82 checked the box as no.
Thank you.
Well, you know, in Lawrence, they tell you, we don't need a requirement because we're Lawrence. Who wouldn't want to live here, right? That's how Lawrence works.
Well, we have the added bonus of what GTP has put up for moving here.
That's right.
So,
what is our process for, do we do checks of residency, particularly for, I know we have 1,000+ employees. I'm not saying every employee, but I mean, is that just based on a complaint that's filed? Hey, I don't think, or do we just sometimes, at least with department heads, do a random, hey, you still live in where you said? What is our follow-up?
So our follow-up is, and we have a series of communications. So when you're approaching the end of your probationary period, if we still are showing a non-Topeka or Shawnee County address, we send an early communication. Your probation ends here. Your date to meet residency is X, and we see that you've still not, this is what you'll need to do by this date. And then if they come out of compliance, at the compliance date, we send another communication and tell them that they're out of compliance. We generally give them 45 days to come into compliance, or say that could result in termination. So those are the new people that come in not meeting residency. For other residency, if there's a change of address that comes through and it's changing, say, from Topeka to outside of Shawnee County, then we contact them, remind them of the residency requirement, try to find out the circumstance. Sometimes it's I'm building a house and I'm having to temporarily live with my parents, so then we would reach out to city manager and say, this is the situation. Can we give them an exception for 6 months or whatever while that's going on? Sometimes they might be saying, well, I'm resigning, my spouse has already moved, and this is my end of employment date, and so then we don't worry about that. Sure. I had one instance where a person literally on Highway 24 entered into a lease, and the north side is Jackson County and the south side was Shawnee County. So then we made an exception for the end of that lease and let them come back into compliance. Other things that we do is when we send out W-2s, we still mail those, and so any that are returned without a Shawnee County address, we contact that employee and say, hey, we have your W-2. By the way, residency, you've got 30 to 45 days to come into compliance. So that's how we monitor it on an ongoing basis.
Okay. Current, I don't know, the current code really is very unclear. I mean, right, it gives discretion at this point to city manager or staff to determine what those criteria are. And I know we had a discussion last year about how those were created, and I know Brent had nothing to do with the current ones, this is not but I mean, that still sort of leaves that up to discretion of staff to make those determinations. I know it's a little unclear, correct, in our current
well, we give
ordinances as to what should be.
So the ordinance does not define it as being your primary residence, and so since the time I've been here, we've used the term bona fide residence, and so that means providing a mortgage or lease agreement in your name Utilities such as gas, electric, water, cable in your name and the service address showing Topeka or Shawnee County. Voter registration information for Shawnee County, or your most recent tax filing with a Shawnee County address. Those are the types of documentation that we ask for to demonstrate a bona fide Shawnee County residence.
Sure. And in my perspective, regardless of whether, there will always be employees who are going to be required to be citizens. I think at some point we should, this isn't your issue, we should probably clarify that in our ordinances so that we're not left up to the discretion of staff to have to be the ones who bear the brunt of, well, is this the determination or is this? We have a very clear, this is how we decide under our ordinances if you're a resident of this county or not. So I think for sure that's one of those things we may take a look at that'll come out of this, is clarifying what that is. I had one other question. Any other questions from either you two? I had a couple, but all right, so just a couple. Do we have any specific positions that it's been more of an issue with residency in recruiting specific talent than others?
I would say our more technical positions and our engineering positions are where we're seeing that challenge the most. Excuse me, Bill, I don't know if you've got something in mind.
Councilman, that's why I have Braxton Copley on. He has engineering positions, and really just have a conversation with him, the difficulty, because his are very specific engineers that he has to try to find, and so we can let him talk to that point.
Sure. Go ahead, Braxton.
Thank you. Spencer, Tony, Hannah, hello.
Yep. Good. Now we're losing you.
Someone has told me that they... Can you hear me?
Can now, yep.
Okay, I apologize. Sketchy Wi-Fi. So let me just give you an example of the struggles that we have had obtaining engineers. For 3 years, I had a stormwater engineer 2 position open. I would say I probably had a half a dozen applicants that were qualified during that 3-year period that I was able to interview. Ultimately, I had an EIT in the wastewater section who got his PE license and then worked for 2 years to meet the minimum qualifications, and that's who I ultimately ended up hiring in that stormwater engineer position. For the last year, well over a year, I've had a water engineer 2 position that has been open and has been advertised. I have not had a single applicant for that position. For the last year, I've had open a wastewater 1 engineer position. And again, I have not had a single applicant for that position. And then finally, I have a vacant stormwater and levee engineer position. That would be an engineer 2 position open. And that's been open for 6 months, and I have not had a single applicant for that position. Approximately a year ago, I was able to work with Human Resources, and they actually did a wage study and comparison for engineers. And we created, based on that study, we created a new pay scale for engineers that allowed me to increase the amount of pay. And even with that new pay scale, I've still not had applicants for 3 vacant engineer positions that I have in the utilities, and that's out of 6 engineers. So anything that we could do to increase the pool would be helpful in my opinion. And certainly I know that the state of Kansas, which employs a large number of engineers throughout KDHE, Kansas Department of Agricultural, Division of Water Resources, does not have a residency requirement. And I know many of just because of my dealings with those departments, I know many of them reside in Lawrence and they commute over here. So that's, I'm not trying to struggle, and the facts are. Questions?
We'll lost you there at the end, Braxton, but we got you. Was there anyone else from staff who wanted to address anything before I?
If I could add,
sure.
we've also had some challenges with our attorney positions more recently, and residency. So, that's another area that we're seeing an impact.
What, lawyers are a dime a dozen. I know. My family.
You would think.
I can just throw a rock and get you a lawyer. What are you talking about? No, was there anyone else from staff? If not,
No,
that's
sir.
fine. I just-
What we wanted to do is just give some basic information as to issues that we are dealing with. This isn't asking to get rid of residency or keep
No,
residency.
we're
It's
not.
just to provide. What we wanted to do is provide that input and then receive guidance from this committee as to, what you would really like to see us start researching and be able to provide to you.
And as I've told Bill and city manager, our plan is at some point hear from some of our public safety departments. I think a component of this is, and our staff does a good job of this when they can, but it's not their bailiwick, and they don't always have the time. Is if we start to want to do some better job of recruiting people or targeting people, who do we have in the community who we can call, where the staff can go to them and say, I want this person, pay's not the issue, but I need you to full court press them with me, because that's not our thing as a staff all the time, and we may bring some of those folks in to talk to us about some cooperation and collaboration we can do to help get those people to actually see parts of Topeka they otherwise wouldn't have to want to move here, and so that's part of this conversation too.
Sheriff?
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I guess a couple points. First of all, I was shocked, Jackie, that you said we have a trouble with attorneys just because we have a law school here, and there's, I don't know, a couple thousand people that come here just to go to the law school. I guess that really surprises me. So I wonder how much of this is a residency thing. You got to be careful about misattributing things. The reason for this is because of residency. It may not be. I think with engineers, for instance, it's pay. Frankly, we have some city positions that only require a high school degree, that the people are making more money than these professional degrees. And so it's a pay issue. It's not a residency, it's pay. And those engineers might have to make, $150,000 a year to get a good engineer here.
So I think Lisa may talk a little bit.
Okay.
It's on the retention side where we're seeing it with attorneys.
Yeah.
And so I will let Lisa talk about what she's experienced.
Yeah, that's right, Councilmember. We've had actually several attorneys leave, and it was not because of pay. They left because of the residency requirement. Two had significant others in Lawrence. One moved on to Manhattan, but would have stayed had they been able to commute. So, that is an issue. Again, it's an issue for us. I mean, we patch along and we're fine. Like Chief Cochran said, I mean, we're not here to, get into a debate about it. But if the question's asked about whether or not we have issues, then I'm kind of like Braxton. We do have issues, primarily with retention.
If I could just, one of the attorney examples, we recruited an attorney who lived in Lawrence and had every intention of maintaining the residency requirement. However, her husband became a police officer in Overland Park, and so Lawrence was kind of a middle ground for them. But given that career, she ultimately resigned here so that he could continue his career as an Overland Park police officer. So that's one of the scenarios that we were faced with there. And I absolutely agree that salary is a factor. And I think sometimes as a municipal government, we understand that we want to be comparable, but we're not trying to be the highest paid. So there's a balance sometimes. And so I think that when they weigh maybe the salary being the same and then having to relocate, that becomes an issue for some candidates. So I think that's one of the things that can be a factor in that way, but definitely pay is something that we recognize and try to look at, and we strive to be comparable, but not, we're not able to compete with private sector engineering or such.
Chair?
Yep.
Thank you, Chair. The main anecdotal story I hear is a lot like what Ms. Robertson just alluded to, that I work here, my spouse works here, or my kids are in school here. And it seems like, especially if we're looking at specialized positions where it's harder to get the right candidate into our position, or it just seems like we're putting up arbitrary walls, and that allows us to lose talent much more quickly. And that means that our department heads are scrambling for filling in those right positions. I know that for my personal business, if I had a residency requirement, I would not have the talent pool that I have now, and I would not have the dedication from the employees that I have now. As much as we want to make sure that our community is supporting itself, I think it's also important to realize that by saying that we have this requirement shuts out everybody outside of this 130,000 people who live in this area. And as an employer, as a manager, I know that I would find it immensely frustrating to know that I would lose all of those other people because of that requirement. I do think that there is an important component of this, and maybe looking at department heads or different management positions, having that residency requirement is integral to making sure that you are a incorporated part of our community. But it does seem really frustrating whenever you're trying to get your start and it's like, well, all you had to do is move to Topeka. Well, if you're uprooting your entire life for this job, you're prioritizing this job over everything else going on in your family. That I know that I've heard from many people that that's been an easy choice to say, okay, then we're walking away from this.
Councilmember.
Is there have we talked about how are there cities who give preference to citizens or municipalities or counties who give preference to residents over non-residents? Does that seem like a more approachable solution?
So I actually looked at some of the creative things I have seen that cities have done, because I've sort of tried to look at all this, include things like basically slightly different pay scales for if you live in the county or if you don't, or at least how they structure benefits or incentives depending upon what the department is. I mean, there's all different departments have different to sort of incentivize people to be a part of the community. And it's usually not a huge gap, but it's enough that someone says, yeah, that's worth me making that move long term. Others have done things where for issues like Jacque brought up, spouse leaves, and then they have to make a tough decision. Some cities have said, well, if you've been an employee for X amount of years, and we can grant you that waiver as long as these circumstances, usually spousal relocation, that way you're not losing a really good employee who's been there for a while, but you're also not, not trying to recruit against yourself in terms of getting them to live. So there are some creative modes that sort of keep things down the middle and continue to promote your community that I've looked at and seen. And so those are some that I'm going to try to put some of those into a document and bring them forward for at least some consideration or at least thought to part of this problem. Because here's the reality. We do have a problem. Now, I don't know what the solution is yet. Maybe it's not changing the residency requirement. Maybe it's looking at pay scales. Maybe it's doing a better job of recruitment and retention. But we clearly have a problem, right? And so instead of, what I don't want to do here for the next 4 months is just acknowledge, well, we had a problem and we talked about it, and hey, good job. That was a lot of time well spent, right? That sounded good. Come out of this with something that says we feel better off being able to recruit and retain people than when we came into this conversation. And so whatever that looks like, I honestly don't know. And I'll tell you, in terms of the residency thing, just in and of itself, I'm very conflicted about that. I'm a lifelong Topeka, and I live here. I'm not going anywhere, and I want everybody to live here. But I recognize some of these problems. So, and I'll tell you right now, my mother and I disagree on this issue. So I hear it as much from my own mother as I do anyone else about, don't you dare change this, or right? So trust me, it's a so I don't know what it's going to look like, but I do want us to address those issues. And to that, the two things that would be nice to see in the next couple months is, one, if we could look at the top 5-8 cities and counties of what they're in Kansas compared to what those requirements are, and what they've done, just their basic residency requirements, that would be helpful to give us something to look at. Because the reality is we are competing against some of those same communities, and we'd be interested to see what they do. The second thing is, and some of this, as Braxton alluded, is already being done. We don't need like a huge chart, but it would be nice to look at some of the key positions we're having problems consistently recruiting, and looking at the pay scales, so we can get some understanding of where we rate according to the market. Are we really, I mean, if the issue is pay and we find out we are in some of way below the market rate in a couple of those positions because we haven't looked at a few, that's something the council probably wants to consider as we go into budget time, so, and I know some departments have done it, but those two pieces of information would be very helpful.
So just as informational, I've just finalizing a scope of work for a management and executive position compensation study RFP. And so I'll be finalizing that, and I expect that will be out. I don't know how long it will take for them to conduct that. We haven't done a large-scale comp study since 2017, so it's time. And so we're working on that, and that'll be some new data. But I would say that we're probably looking at probably late June, early July before we have the data from that study.
That'll be good, because while we all acknowledge we cannot compete, as all government can't, with the market itself, the private market, we sure as heck better be competitive with comparable cities that we're trying to recruit from, and we got to know what that is to keep those people. Yes, sir.
I think going forward, there's a couple things we need to keep in mind just when we look at this as a whole. The younger generation is a lot more mobile. There's a virtual aspect that probably has to be looked at as we move forward because of what we've experienced over the last year and a half. And then it's been touched on, the younger population now has dual careers. The spouses both spouses have careers, and so I think those are the other things that we have to balance, and we talk about that. If you live in Kansas City, one has a good job there, the other one takes a job here. So I think those are three things we have to really look at. The other thing on the recruiting end, Councilman Emerson, I think we've done a lot of great things here in the last couple of months with HR. We're entering into some cooperative agreements with Washburn Tech on the fire side and EMS side, as well as the law enforcement side. And so we're, really trying to engage in that. And then, as you say, the law school here in town. So we're establishing some great we're actually expanding on some great partnerships with our local university and higher education system. So we're excited where those are going to be taking us here in the near future, but it'll take a little bit to get some of those up and going completely.
Sure. Yep, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Chair. I guess, Spencer, kind of to follow up on your thing a little bit about, I don't know if it was you or, because you were talking about a preferential maybe pay or something if you're a city or a county resident. And I guess my other thing is there any preference in hiring? If there are two candidates, if you're already a Topeka here and live here and own a house here, is that those are the people that are probably going to be retained, right? Especially if they have kids here and they're already established here. So I don't know if that can maybe be looked at or if it is considered.
I can't tell you that it's a consideration of the hiring managers today, but it's certainly something that we could look at and try to see what makes sense and try to encourage them to look at that as a factor when they feel like they've got two close candidates. It makes sense that they would be more willing to stay. If there was one thing that I could also touch on, one of the challenges that we have come across in some of our more labor-intensive positions is we have a lot of positions that require a commercial driver's license. And we have a lot of rural communities surrounding Shawnee County where maybe individuals have CDL, they operate a farm, or they've taken over the family farm or whatever, so they are tied to where they are at because of that industry. But they also need full-time employment. And so we lose some of those individuals because of residency, and we do have some challenges with people filling those positions because of CDL, or we hire them and they can't attain a CDL. So that is another skill set where we've seen that maybe there's a pool that we're not able to tap into because they reside on farms just in the surrounding areas outside of Shawnee County.
All right. Well, we'll get that information together. We'll continue this discussion at our next meeting in June, first part of July, whenever the heck that's going to be. And then, any other final comments from members of the committee? Comments, questions? Any comments from anyone else in the room? Speak now or forever. Pardon?
Public?
Yep, public comment.
Yeah, sure.
All right. You got 5 minutes under the new
All right.
committee rules.
Well, that's
Maybe even too long.
What?
I got somewhere to be, Joe.
No,
Keep me-
2.5
He's the
minutes.
chair.
I believe it's 2.5 minutes.
I know. I know. I hadn't passed them out yet. I should have. You got 30 seconds.
Well, I can say a lot.
Lessons learned. Lessons learned.
It's interesting to hear this and to hear the regurgitation of some of the stuff I heard a year and a half ago. And I do have a fairly lucid memory of those facts and those some of the scope of those discussions. One of the things I heard today, especially out of utilities, was, well, I've got a problem hiring specialized engineers. Engineering is a problem all over this country. I've read that. So I noticed that utilities does a lot of contracting out to firms, and they seem to have no problem doing that, even on stormwater ordinances and things like that I would have thought would have been done in-house by legal. So maybe they need to do more contracting out instead of worrying about changing the whole residency requirement. When spouses get recruited to another town, it's because they applied for those jobs. So obviously they did that with that spouse's knowledge, I would hope, or they're going to divorce court. So it seems like one way to get around any future residency requirement would be to say, well, my spouse took a job in Lawrence, so now I want to move there. Even though they knew all along they were going to do that. Why didn't they get recruited to the local police department? We need those candidates too. I'm not saying that this cannot be couched as a problem, quote unquote, but when I look at the myriad of problems this city has, like a lack of good code enforcement, when I see the streets and the condition they are for the last 10 years, and especially 3.5 years, and I'm going to give a pass to the new public works director because he just got here, but I've seen these ongoing problems for years, and I've talked about them to the council, and that's a quality of life situation and issue. And if it seems like if we would solve some of these hierarchy problems in this community, one of these issues of recruiting might go away. Like, I'd rather live in a city that's got nice neighborhood parks. Well, that's a county issue. But I'm working on that because I'm part of that committee with Parks and Rec. And we've made some real progress in the last year. But quality of life, making sure our bike trails are operational and not shut down by railroads, making sure that our community is actually solving problems like blight and nuisance issues by the legal, making sure they're on top of it and they finish the problem and get it done. Let me talk about lawyers. Lawyers respond to money. Lawyers will probably live anywhere if the pay's high enough. You've got 2 law schools within 20 miles here. When I was at law school, I never heard anything from the city of Topeka recruiting anybody. And I don't know if I doubt they went down to KU either. But I noticed, just to talk the whole problem, if it's a problem, I've noticed we've got some very long-term lawyers here. So turnover doesn't seem to be a problem. Is it pay? Maybe it's the pay of the newer people not getting paid enough in comparison to people that have been here a long time. I don't know what that issue is, but before I just throw the baby out with the bathwater, I want to know that I'm really comparing apples to apples, and I'm getting all the facts and not just part of the facts, and I'm not just getting spin, but I'm actually getting a real diagnosis, department by department, of what those few positions are that they're having trouble recruiting to. And as I said, I don't think the current interim director of utilities ever has a problem contracting things out and having the manager sign it. And so if you need to contract some engineering services out, I guess that would be a way to solve some of that and maybe have less employees. Anyway, thank you for allowing me to speak. I didn't come here expecting to, but this is an interesting topic because there's a lot of things that need to be examined, not just what we hear from staff, but some of those outside components that I just raised. Thank you.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Ledbetter. Oh, my phone. All right, with that, we will close this topic and move on to the next one, which is Governing Body Rules and Procedures Amendment. I guess, Bill, is that you or Jackie or who's going to take this one?
City Manager, are you still
all
on?
seem so excited. No,
Or
he's
Lisa,
on. But I
Lisa,
don't-
you got it? That's right, Lisa's got it.
Yep, I sent this one out, committee members. We usually, when I first got here, we sent the governing body rule updates to the Policy and Finance Committee. I want to say that was 2016. Then Brenda and I decided that, maybe we should do an annual update. Then I think the governing body members didn't want to do an annual update, so we kind of left it to letting it go for however long we thought it should be let go as far as how many comments we received, because over the course of whatever it is, a year or 2 years, we'll just write down comments that we received from council members about we'd like to see this change to the governing body rules or that change. We've done that. Primarily what I've heard, and of course you all have as well during the course of the past year, has to do with a lot of remote participation in council meetings. We really don't have that addressed currently in the governing body rules. So we put some language together that kind of addresses that. I also sent you some examples from, I think it was a Virginia city that had a much more elaborate process when it came to being able to participate remotely. Again, these are your rules, but we just put down different comments in place that we have heard along the road. So in addition to the remote, the other one I wanted to bring up was you'll see a lot of changes in the motion section. One that we added was a motion that we used about 3 times last year. It was the rescind an action previously adopted or amend an action previously taken. We used that, in February and July and October of last year. So we've kind of always used the motion to reconsider as that method, but motions to reconsider are really a lot stricter than that. And as I put notes in there, the municipal league, they don't even suggest that some of their cities have them. They just say leave it out. Robert's Rules has the motion to reconsider, but you can only use it during the same meeting at which the action was taken. It's pretty clear in there. So we have it in there to keep if you want. If you want to go with the LKM, we can take it out. Again, these are your rules. It's kind of up to you how you want them to look. But I did add in that motion to amend and rescind because we had used it a few times. So we could just kind of walk through them. You could say, yeah, this looks good, or beef this up, or take it out, or what have you, and we're happy to do that. Whatever you think will work best.
Other thoughts from the other members, what they'd like to do? Most of these I read, I'll say about half of these are probably just firming stuff up that they're more Robert's Rule of Orders as they were just more of a more general, rule, I guess it was. It's making a little more clarity. Things like motion needs a second, and we got to just stick to that before we can wander off. Of course, sometimes that depends on who's running the meeting, what happens with that procedure, but that's a different problem. So I mean, I think about 50% of them are those. I mean, I guess I will say, from my having read through them, the one gave me a little heartburn, to be honest, and I know that we have gotten used to Zoom now because of COVID, and I've had no issues with the decisions we've made for safety. I do have a problem with allowing, moving forward, the full body governing body meetings for members to Zoom in. Maybe that's old school me. I mean, we have on average about 32 to 33 meetings a year. I feel like once you run for this office, you sort of know that going in, and that's a commitment you make to at least show up on those 3 Tuesdays a month. I'm a little more lax on if we applied those rules to the committees. I think that would allow for some of these committees to meet a little more often when there really is stuff that needs to go up to the government. So just my personal, and I mean, comment would be, I'm not sure I like that part of it as it applies to the full governing body, but I don't have any issues with it to committees, but that's just me. That was the one that stood out for me among these changes. I found the rest of them to be mostly just clean up in nature from my perspective. But.
And Chair?
Yes, Councilwoman Nager.
Thank you. What was brought up on Tuesday, briefly, was talking about...
The meeting I missed. See, I didn't even zoom in.
The one meeting.
The one meeting I've missed in a year.
Talking about how there are those meetings that, especially if you have business outside the council and you have to go out of town, that would be an appropriate use of Zooming into a meeting rather than being there in person. So maybe an allotted number of Zoom-ins or...
And this has that. This has no more than 3 a year.
Yeah.
And I get it.
So,
like
that
I said,
was what was discussed by the governing body on Tuesday.
I know. See, I wasn't there on Tuesday. You didn't get to hear me pontificate and tell you how I still am not a big fan of that. But like I said, that was really the only thing that stood out to me. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to read through them or had any other thoughts, but there was one I had a question about, which I even highlighted, because I understood it, but 5.2, governing body meeting agendas, addition and removal of items from the agenda. I think I know what we're trying to do there, but between the blue and the black and the crossouts, I'm trying to make sure I fully understand what that section is now doing. I keep reading it over and I'm like, I think I'm there, but is that not already policy? Is that just one of those cleanups, or where we can just add something? Okay.
It is. Council member, this one is in the code, and I can't recall right off the top of my head the exact reason why I thought it was a little bit confusing. I just went to the code and actually just placed the language in there so it mirrored it. Another thing I wanted to mention too, I think a couple of people over the course of the last year or two wanted people or committees to be able to send their items out of committee back to the body as a discussion item instead of being limited to an action item. Because as it stands now, really, you're only supposed to bring items out of committee and place them on the agenda for action. So we just changed that up to read action or discussion, gives a little bit more flexibility.
That'd be good, because we're talking about an issue before this meeting that would be perfect for that action. Yeah. So what great timing you have on that one.
So, and there was one other, I think one council member had talked about the idea, it's in 5.6, addressing the governing body about asking for the individual who comes up to state their name, but also to relay what their city of residence was. This was probably a year and a half ago. I can't even recall who mentioned it. So that's another one that we placed in there.
I like that change. In fact, I swear that years ago used to be just part of the standard. We used to tell people, somebody give their address, which you don't really have to tell us your address, but at least tell me. And I think we've had a couple issues over the last year and a half where we've had some public comment. A couple things came up, and one, there was a group that came up promoting something. I think they were just traveling through, and they all spoke to us, but none of them, I don't think, let alone live in Topeka, let alone Kansas. And it would have been nice to at least have them say, yes, none of us actually even live in your state, but we came here to tell you what to do. So I do appreciate that change also. Yes, Councilman Emerson.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just kind of a question about procedure here.
That's what
I think, I mean, I did go through all these, but I think we just had these for a few days, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. I mean,
is it your thought, Chair, that we may, I mean,
my
take
so
action
yeah,
next time?
no. My plan would be to schedule a meeting for the end, our next meeting of this body, end of June or like right after the 4th of July. So if that timeline is okay with staff, I'd rather just plan to put it on that agenda for whatever changes / approval, unless there's a need to get this done sooner. Then it could be in one of the July agendas, late in July or something.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think the issue that we have is that we're already doing the suspension of the rules until July 7th. So, you know, there's no rush, and then we can always add another month.
Okay.
If we know we've got something that, you know, add another month on afterwards.
Okay. Yeah, we'll plan to take whatever action we need to take or changes at our next meeting here, and then that way it can move forward still, but gives us another month to talk to our colleagues and maybe in some other stuff and figure out what we would like to do with these.
Councilmember Duncan, I was looking at the discussion or action piece, and that's an 8.5D. It's on page, oh gosh, it's that line.
Yeah, they don't have page numbers.
711, line 706 and 711.
Placement on agenda, is that what we're?
Yeah, so that was the issue that people were having was, if you have an item that was referred to the committee, if the governing body referred a matter to the committee, it says that item shall be placed on a regular governing body agenda as an action item. And so the angst was that folks wanted to place it on the agenda if they wished, the committee wished to do so as a discussion item, so that the governing body could discuss the committee's recommendation and not feel that they were being pressed to take any action at that time. And then the next item, number 2, is if an item is initiated by a committee, it may be placed on a regular governing body member as a discussion or action item. But the shall and the may haven't been changed in these two.
Well, yeah.
One says shall and B2 says may.
Yeah, we'll place on regular body as a discussion. It doesn't say shall, does it?
In D1.
Shall be placed. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Shall's
D2
right.
says may.
Yeah. We want that as a shall, correct?
Well, that's.
Or do you want that as a may?
That's the item you were bringing up, I think, and I wanted to clarify that.
Oh, I got you. Okay.
Yeah, really talk about
This
how
is
it's
where
placed on the agenda.
this is where I always have to go to my handy phone and remind myself, because they get so confusing, and remind everyone what the difference between shall versus may is, right?
That means you're compelled to, or
Right.
you have to.
May is discretionary.
So are there thoughts from the other council members whether they shall at least go to a discussion item?
Yeah, Chair, I like the option, because oftentimes it is something that we may want to discuss, and it might not, want to get input of other people on the body before we approve it.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right, so shall is our,
May.
May. Jeez, Lord, I even knew it the minute I said it. All right. So let's do that now. Can we make that change now?
So, are you saying in line 705 you want shall to be changed to may?
Correct.
Or are you saying in line 710 you want may to be changed to shall?
An item initiated and considered by a committee concerned to say
Hold on a second.
may be
Let
placed on
me read
that.
it in context here.
Well, we want them to both be the same, whichever we choose. Would we not? Why would we want them to be different? What would be the rationale for having a difference?
Well, Councilmember, I think the rationale initially is if the item was referred to the committee by the governing body, then obviously that's something that the governing body as a whole wants the committee to take a look at more specifically this particular item and then come back to them and give their recommendation on how to move forward. But the distinction on 2 is that if the committee initiates it, that it's just something that the committee thinks is important and wants to discuss. And they may, as a result, take something back as a discussion or action
All right,
item.
I'm with you now. All right.
But that was the reasoning behind it.
Well, we want to leave 2 as may. You want, which is what you were referring to. We want to leave 2, something that comes out of committee.
No, I wanted to, I guess, Chair, I wanted to make sure that it is compelled to come back as a discussion or action.
Out of committee.
And isn't that what it says? Placement on the, shall be placed on a regular governing body meeting agenda as a discussion or action item. So that's what you're already suggesting, correct?
Yes, for an item that's referred by the governing body to a committee.
Yeah, and then initiate or considered, may be placed on as a discussion or action. I mean,
May be placed, so that's.
I like what they're saying.
You're right, you prefer the may on section 2. I'm okay with that. I'm just trying to make sure we're.
Yeah, because doesn't the shall is fine, isn't it, in the first one? Because if they refer it, then we have to bring it back. We don't have the option of, I guess,
Correct.
basically of killing it in committee.
Correct.
I think, yes, I think you're correct, absolutely, Councilmember Emerson.
even-
I think that one has to stay shall.
Yeah, and even if it comes back as a discussion, at least we're reporting back, we wanted to kill this in committee.
Right,
It's a terrible
we tried.
idea.
We
But
tried
it
our
doesn't
best.
come back as an action item that the governing body has to take an affirmative. All right, and so then you would like to leave 2 as
Yeah, I mean,
may.
yeah, I mean, I like how I guess it's been edited, adding discussion.
Okay, I'm okay with all of that.
Okay.
And Councilwoman Nager, you're okay with that also?
I am okay with it.
So let's do this as let's do this though, because I know there are committees that are going to be meeting over the next month and a half, if there's a will here. I'm okay if we wanted to pass out 8.5 right now, unless you don't need it by July. I mean, do you want this done now, or you just want that clarification before we?
No, Councilmember, thank you though for offering. We're okay with waiting, if you
Okay.
want to wait longer.
All right, I got there. Took me a minute.
You know,
but I
what
got
we've been doing is we've been accommodating. So if somebody wants to,
there. No, we've already had that
Let's get
discussion.
on.
Okay, no, we're good. Those
thank
are
you so
fine.
much.
Like I said, there will be some other discussion. We can, if we have to revisit that, we will. God help us. Any other thoughts on this? Any other comments from staff? We'll stick to that deadline. And with that, again, we'll just stick to our general. I'll have Liz send out something. We'll shoot for, like I said, end of June or after the 4th of July for the next meeting of this body, and we'll take up the residency issue again. We'll look at this, and we will probably talk about, we will talk about the contract ordinance. So that is the plan as of now. Anyone else have anything else to say? Speak now, or that's it. Have a good weekend. Thank you, everybody. We're adjourned.
Bye.